seemed disconnected from her body. She smudged her initial on the mirror's dusty surface. C for Catherine. No last name. She was a widow. She stepped aside, and her image slipped out of the mirror cleanly, as if she'd passed through water. An odorless, bodiless thing. The mirrors were the lakes in the landscape of this house, she thought. Somehow they were linked to one another, as all glass and water were related. The immense mirror in the ballroom, a triptych positioned at the heart of the house, was a great pool, a place of transfer, and the other mirrors magically flowed into it, tributaries of silver. When the last mirror was taken down, it would mark a turning point in the fortunes of the house, a darkening of the places formerly stung by light. Official papers from the military listed the rooms that would be requisitioned to accommodate the wounded soldiers and the hospital staff. All the reflective objects in the public spaces were to be put in storage. The military would take away the mirrors. Perhaps they would also demand clocks, watches, other witnesses and timekeepers, sundials, calendars. Everyone was concerned with time, how slowly it passed, how long it would be until the war was over. The names of the dead wound through the Times like an immeasurable grey ribbon, filling page after page in small type. How could faith work against this? Followed by the elderly head gardener and two silent boys, Catherine quickly walked through the long gallery into the pink drawing-room, stopping before a mirror in a lacquered chinoiserie frame. Held in the unforgiving slant of its rectangular surface, they appeared ill at ease, their faces dilated, her sombre crepe dress and the servants' rough work clothing clumsily shrouding their thickened bodies. "Take this mirror down first." Catherine struggled to compress her bitter feeling of loss, afraid that the mirror would exaggerate her expression. "As you wish, Mom." The mirrors in the next room had an even greater age, set in cracked gilt frames, darkened with a lichen-like black growth on their backsides, evidence of time's poisonous breath. At the corners of the frames hung tiny golden bells that remained silent, poised to delicately protest their descent from the wall. "Remove everything in the room that has a shine or reflection. The clock, the silver bowl, and the vases on the mantel." A moment later she said, "No, leave the bowl there. Let it tarnish. But take this away too." She pointed to the mirror set in the door of a cabinet, and left them to work. The three servants cleared the mantelpiece, emptied the bureau, secretaire, and knee-hole desk. A letter opener, a picture frame, and a compass plated with bright silver were discovered inside a desk compartment lined with scratched green leather. The older boy wrapped them in a flannel cloth and laid them in a box. He picked up a paperweight, a smooth dome of coloured glass, irresistible as candy. The gardener wasn't accustomed to working in the house, and his voice was too loud as he told the boy to put the thing down and fetch a ladder. The boy raced across the bare wood floor, his footsteps shaking the chandelier, jarring its prisms into quivering motion, creating sharp-angled patterns that swept across the walls and ceiling around them, transforming the room into a giant kaleidoscope. Returning with the ladder, he set it up in an unsteady balance against the wall. The smaller mirrors were slowly lowered from the walls, and the boys carried them to the attic one at a time, where they were laid in rows on the floor. The gardener waited, casting a nervous eye over the huge central mirror hanging in the pink drawing-room. When the boys returned, he made them study the mirror on the wall for a full 3 minutes to familiarize themselves with its weight and fragility. The mirror was more than 6 feet long, and it wobbled and flashed in their hands, as if with its removal from the wall a spell had been broken, and it might suddenly become less reliably physical and flow out over the frame. The boys whispered to each other, soft speech a charm against dropping it. Bundled in blankets, the mirror was carried horizontally, as if the boys were pallbearers manoeuvring it through the enormous house, up the front staircase, then to a narrower flight of stairs. Under their sweating hands, the blanket around the mirror released a pronounced odour of raw wool. They reached the attic, and without setting down the unwieldy burden, one of them kicked the attic door. It swung violently open, and they stopped, dazzled by the reflection from the mirrors covering the floor. As they entered the room, a hot line of sunlight leaked through a window, magnifying the mirrors into brilliance so the floor appeared to be flooded with silver water, and they marvelled like explorers encountering a strange, unexpected sea. Early in the 18th century, the owner of the estate had paced the grounds and ordered a number of small ornamental pavilions, follies and grottos built in the most picturesque locations. Seemingly built for temporary pleasure, some of the structures were as fragile as theatrical scenery, fabricated from porous rock, plaster, limestone and ancient bricks scavenged from ruins on the property. Inside, the walls and ceilings glittered with stalactites, crystal spars, molten glass, or were roughly patterned with fossils, shells, pebbles. The sawed leg bones of oxen had been painstakingly set into one still intact floor. The structures had long been undefended against time, weather, the purposeful stones of vandals, and since the gardening staff had volunteered for military service, the grounds had been untended for 2 seasons. Stone walls and glass had cracked, streams had clouded with silt. The Chinese temple was near collapse. The extravagant gilt on the carved, finned fish at the top of its pointed roof had faded to rough scales. Inside, the painted figures on the walls were clothed in shabby fragments of colour that had once been lavish oriental dress. A temple dedicated to an unknown nymph had lost its faux limestone base, and a mock Gothic tower had a broken parapet. One of the smaller follies had been captured by nets of vines, and the walls of another pavilion were submerged by the lake. Entire buildings and statuary had been stitched over by threads of grass and weeds, lost to memory. Recently, Catherine had been startled by a sudden gurgle of water, a captive noise below her feet as she stood on a hidden drain near the vinery. The under-butler had pointed out the ice-house to Catherine, a sandstone vault surmounting a conical brick well nearly 23 feet deep. His father had been born on the estate and passed on the living knowledge of a time when this well was filled with ice layered with salt and straw to keep it frozen through the summer months. Now it was empty and echoing, and the spidery steps that clung to its sides were so steeply angled that they induced vertigo in the few who had risked a descent. Months after her husband's death, Catherine had met a friend at the Carlton Hotel and announced she intended to raze all the ornamental buildings on the estate. "The buildings have no purpose. There is no question that since the war I have simply lost tolerance for damaged things. I only want to keep what's worth keeping." "Oh, leave them be. It's not as if you need the land," her friend answered, bored with the discussion. But Catherine had been insistent. "I want to pull down the buildings and use the materials for something else." She had longed to sweep everything away. She waited for the flat landscape of winter, the oblivion of snow, to erase her choices. Making choices wearied her. It became Catherine's habit to listen, convinced she heard the sound of destruction, the wrenching of brick, stone and wood as the ornamental buildings were forced from shape, exposing bare earth underneath to light for the first time in 149 years. At a shattering noise, crisp as china breaking, Catherine looked up from the letter she was writing. Curious, she put down her fountain pen and left the house. Walking past the lake, she composed a picture of the mirrors as they had been taken down in the house behind her, their brilliant, sharp-angled reflections sweeping across the rooms, passing over silk draperies and painted surfaces without a mark, altering nothing with the cold blankness of their light. The entrance to the grotto was hidden by marsh grass, its door a rounded opening between rough stones. Inside, her eyes adjusted to the taper of light created by a hole in the roof, and gradually the dimness lifted, revealing an intricate pattern on the walls, thousands and thousands of shells, a surface as softly lustrous as a fruit stripped of its skin, fragile as porcelain. Catherine stepped forward, her boot blindly crushing the fallen shells into powder. "I intend to join my regiment in 2 weeks' time," Catherine's husband had told her in the pink drawing-room. Catherine remembered that as Charles had spoken, a maid approached, and the silver tray in the girl's hands reflected a zigzag of glare into her eyes. Now she understood it had been a warning that a bullet or the flash of an explosion in a field would take his life, destroy their future. Charles had died, and she remained in the huge house, surrounded by a constellation of objects collected by generations of